Hi friends, today we will discuss a very important topic in neurology, that is Bell's palsy. First, we will discuss some anatomic considerations of facial nerve, then we will have a look on brief intro, then clinical features of the disease, what is the pathophysiology, what all are the differential diagnosis, then finally lab evaluation and the treatment of this condition. You can download the free PDF of this lecture from the MediLectures app as well as attempt free test and quiz on the app. Kindly check out the Harrison based test series course on the app. Description is as follows. When we consider the anatomy of facial nerve in contrast to trigeminal nerve, which was predominantly sensory, the facial nerve is predominantly motor. It supplies all the muscles of facial expression. Now the sensory component is through nervus intermedius, which brings the sensations from the anterior two-thirds of tongue. These are the taste sensations. So this nervus intermedius will bring taste sensation from anterior two-thirds of tongue as well as cutaneous impulses from the anterior wall of external auditory canal. Now the course of nerve is as follows. After leaving the pons, the facial nerve traverses the internal acoustic meatus, then facial canal, and finally emerges through stylomastoid foramen into the parotid gland, where it subdivides to supply the facial muscles. Now let's discuss the lesions and its effects. If the lesion is at stylomastoid foramen, it will paralyze all the muscles of facial expression. It will paralyze all the muscles of facial expression, and there will be characteristic drooping of the corner of mouth. The creases of skin folds are effaced. The forehead becomes unfurrowed and eyes will not be able to close. Now upon attempted closure of the eyelids, the eye on the paralyzed side will roll upwards. This is known as Bell's phenomena. That is, on the side of paralysis, that is side of facial paralysis, if we try to attempt the closure of eyelids, there is upward rolling of the eyeballs. This is known as Bell's phenomena. Now when the lesion is in middle ear, the taste is also lost in the anterior two-thirds of the tongue, since it will include the nervus intermedius, and also if the nerve to stapedius is involved, there will be hyperacusis, that is loud sounds. If the lesion is in internal acoustic meatus, then there can be damage to adjacent eighth nerve as well, which can lead to deafness, tinnitus as well as dizziness. There can be damage to adjacent eighth nerve. Now intrapontine lesions can lead to sixth nerve paralysis, damage to corticospinal tracts as well as sensory tracts along with the facial nerve. Now this figure is showing the course of the facial nerve and it should be read in detail. Now there are many causes of facial paralysis, but the most common cause is Bell's palsy. Now it is actually not a cause. Bell's palsy is the term given to idiopathic facial paralysis. So the most common cause of facial paralysis is idiopathic and the term is known as Bell's palsy. The incidence is 25 individuals per 1 lakh individuals annually. This is more common than trigeminal neuralgia. If we talk about lifetime incidence, then it is 1 in 60 persons in their lifetime. That is, 1 in every 60 person will suffer from Bell's palsy. Two known risk factors are pregnancy and diabetes mellitus. Typically, pregnancy in the third trimester is a risk factor for Bell's palsy. Now, when we come to the clinical manifestations, the onset of weakness in Bell's palsy is abrupt with maximum weakness by 48 hours as a rule. There will be complete muscular paralysis on the affected side and will include all the features like drooping of the corner of mouth. There will be effacement of creases and skin folds. The forehead will become unfurrowed and the patient will not be able to close the eyes, and on attempted closure the eyeballs will roll upwards, and this is known as Bell's phenomena. There are sometimes associated features like loss of taste sensation unilaterally if the sensation, that is nervous intermedius, is also involved. There can be hyperacusis if nerve to stapedius is involved, and in some cases mild CSF lymphocytosis is also found. Now, when we do the MRI of these patients, there is swelling and uniform enhancement of facial nerve, and in some cases we can also find entrapment of the swollen nerve in the temporal bone. Now, when we talk about the recovery, 80% of patients will recover completely without any sequela within a month. Now, rest of the patients will have incomplete recovery. Now, coming on to the pathophysiology, in acute Bell's palsy, there is inflammation of facial nerve with predominantly mononuclear cell infiltrate, which is consistent with infectious cause or immune cause. Now, the possible causes which are implicated are herpes simplex virus type 1. The reactivation of this virus in geniculate ganglion can lead to Bell's palsy. 1/3 of the cases are due to varicella zoster virus, and other viruses can also lead to Bell's palsy. Now, in the recipients of intranasal influenza vaccine, it is hypothesized that the E. coli enterotoxin which is used in this vaccine can either lead to Bell's palsy, or there can be reactivation of the influenza virus which can lead to Bell's palsy. Now, coming on to the differential diagnosis. Now, these include all the known causes of facial paralysis, that is, the disorder is now not idiopathic, a known cause is responsible. In the causes of Bell's palsy, no cause was identified, and it was just hypothesized that either herpes simplex or varicella zoster or other viruses can be implicated in Bell's palsy. And in differential diagnosis, we have a known cause, short known cause. So these include facial paralysis due to Lyme disease, and more than 10% of cases of facial palsy in endemic region is due to this Lyme disease, and the organism implicated is Borrelia burgdorferi. Other one is Ramsay-Hunt syndrome. This is due to reactivation of herpes zoster virus in geniculate ganglion, and it will have associated vesicular eruptions in external auditory canal and sometimes in the pharynx. Now, sarcoidosis and Guillain-Barré syndrome can involve facial nerve, and the involvement is usually bilateral. That is, these both disorders will lead to bilateral facial paralysis. Leprosy and connective tissue disorders, especially Sjogren's syndrome and amyloidosis, can lead to facial paralysis. A syndrome known as Merkerson-Rosenthal syndrome, this is characterized by recurrent facial paralysis, recurrent facial edema, and less commonly plication of tongue, that is fissuring of tongue. Now, acoustic neuroma by local compression can also lead to facial paralysis. Now, when we consider the lab evaluation, diagnosis of Bell's palsy is usually made clinically only in patients who have typical presentation of this disorder. there are no risk factors or pre-existing symptoms of other causes of facial paralysis, which we have already discussed in the differential diagnosis. There is absence of cutaneous lesions of herpes zoster in the EAC, that is, we exclude Ramsay-Hunt syndrome, and the neurological examination is absolutely normal except that of facial nerve. Now the investigations which can we go for are ESR or CRP, HbA1c for diabetes mellitus, as it can also involve facial nerve, Lyme titer for Lyme's disease, ACE enzyme levels and chest imaging for sarcoidosis, lumbar puncture for GBS, and finally MRI brain, which can show swelling or enhancement of facial nerve in cases of Bell's palsy, and can also help us rule out other disorders like acoustic neuroma. Now coming on to the final and most important part, that is treatment. First of all, we should follow some symptomatic measures. We have to prevent the corneal drying in the patient by the use of paper tray to depress the upper eyelid during sleep. We can give the artificial tears and ask the patient to do the massage of the weakened muscles. Now the medical management includes glucocorticoids and antiviral drugs. Now prednisolone can be given in a dose of 60 to 80 mg per day for 5 days and then should be tapered gradually. Now the steroids will shorten the recovery period and improve the functional outcome of the patient. Now the antiviral, which is typically against the herpes virus, can be used like acyclovir and valacyclovir. Acyclovir in a dose of 400 mg 5 times a day for 10 days and valacyclovir 1000 mg for 5 to 7 days. Now in some studies these show no added benefit. Therefore many clinicians do not use antivirals in the management of Bell's palsy. Finally, we have surgical management in the patients who have permanent facial paralysis. So we have some cosmetic procedures to restore the symmetry of face. Thank you so much, guys.